I have been fortunate in my life to have been born to a family that went to church. Some of my earliest memories, in fact, are sitting in the East Side Church of Christ there in Aurora with my grandma Edwards, and she used to work for the telephone company way back in the day when you actually picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Ray, can you connect me to so-and-so?" And she plugged it into the wall. And she had one of those plugs on her keychain, and she would give that to us, and I cannot tell you how many of those little pencil holes in the pew in front of you I wore out with that plug, plugging it in and out. And maybe that was a sign of where my career was going to go. But all the way from those earliest memories, one of the things that I also remember is the Lord's Supper. And over the years, it's changed what it's meant to me. I remember in those very early years when we were still going there before we moved that congregation took of the Lord's Supper last. So when that time came around, it was almost time to go home. And then as I grew older, my grandma Logan was the one who, for 35 years, took care of preparing the emblems of the Lord's Supper at that congregation. And she would always bring us grandkids into the room where they prepared that afterwards and give us the leftovers. And I didn't like it very much, I don't think, but it was special because she gave it to me. And then over the years, that just kind of changed until this has become my favorite part of the service. It's the part that means the most to me because of what I know it took for us to be able to have this. Jesus instituted this and said, "Please do this in remembrance of me." And one of the things that over the years has always stuck with me is what happened immediately after. You may remember that as soon as he is there with his disciples in that upper room and he's preparing this meal for them, or that meal was prepared and he's handing it out to them and he's giving them the instructions, they sing a hymn and they leave and they go to a place called the Mount of Olives. And more specifically, we're told into a special garden there called Gethsemane. And this is to me one of the most beautiful passages in the entire Bible because of what it tells us about Jesus Christ and about what he was here to do. This became even more real to me maybe 10 years ago. Jeff brought me back some pictures from when they had gone to a trip in Israel. And can we put those up there? They actually went, if we don't have them, that's not the end of the world. Well, that's all right. While they were on their trip to the Holy Lands, they actually went to and took some pictures of the actual Garden of Gethsemane. And it's not questioned that this is the same place where Jesus prayed. There are some people who have tried to do cuttings off of the trees, and he took several good pictures here. Well, let's just stick with the one that works. It took several good pictures of even some of the paths that are there. And people have tried to say these are maybe even the very same trees that Jesus prayed under. Seems extremely unlikely, but one of the things we do know about olive trees is that even if they're completely cut to the ground or burned, that a new tree can grow from the roots. So even if not the exact same tree, definitely these trees are relatives, direct descendants even, of the trees that Jesus was praying at. I'd like to read that passage in Matthew here. So if you turn with me to Matthew chapter 26, we're going to read this entire section beginning in verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther away, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to his disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again, for a second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And he came and he found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And so, leaving them, he again went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. And he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." One of the reasons that I've always thought this passage was so beautiful is because in all the gospel accounts up to this point, when Jesus has been describing his death, which he's done many times, has he ever showed any hesitation? Has he ever shown any doubt that this is why he was here, or this is what he should be doing? No. He described over and over how they were going to go to Jerusalem and these things were going to happen. The book of Luke, in fact, says many times he set his face toward Jerusalem even when he was traveling north, meaning the entire time he was looking toward the events that were going to happen at Jerusalem. He even told his disciples, "I'm the good shepherd. I'm going to lay down my life for my flock, and it's my choice," right? "No one can take it from me. I am laying down my life. I'll take it back up again, but it's my choice to lay it down." And even after this, in the book of Matthew here, of course, Peter, my favorite apostle, they're standing there, and as Judas and the soldiers come, he draws his sword and cuts off an ear, and Jesus tells him, we don't need to fight. If I was trying to avoid this, what would I do? I'd just ask my Father, and he would give me 12 legions of angels to come and rescue me. So his entire ministry, except for these few hours that he's in the garden, Jesus is confident. He's very direct in what's going to happen. And in no way does he try to vacillate or get out of it. But then we see him here in the garden, and just literally hours before he is going to suffer that absolutely terrible death, he's feeling it. He's sorrowful. He even says, "My soul is sorrowful unto the point of death." And Luke describes him sweating as drops of blood because of how much he knew what was going to happen and how much he wished he didn't have to go through it. But what were the words he used in his prayer? "If there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. But if not, what? Thy will, not mine, be done." And I'm not sure if for 30 plus years of being a Christian, I understood exactly what that meant. Jesus, I had always thought, was unchangeable, that he knew everything, that he had experienced everything, and that him coming here as a man was just something he did. But we find out here that he was changed by his time as a man. That when he was doing this, it was something that he didn't want to do, but yet he learned obedience. In Philippians chapter 2, we have that passage that we all know where it says, he was equal with God, but yet humbled himself to become a man, and that while he was a man, he learned obedience. When you learn something, what does that mean? It means you know something you didn't know before. Prior to this, prior to his time on earth, Jesus had been part of the Godhead, completely in sync with the Spirit and the Father, and everything they wanted was on the same path. And I would even argue here that he's still on the same path, but now, for the first time, what seems in his existence, he comes up upon something that he wishes could be different. And he wishes he could change it. But did he? No. He learned obedience. Hebrews chapter 5, and if we look there in verses 7 through 9, it says, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Hebrews tells us that by learning that obedience, that by doing something that was against his own personal interest, is how he became perfect for us. And it just tells me so much about the character of Jesus, that even though it was something he absolutely did not want to do, he was willing to give up his own wants and his own desires for our sake. And I think about all the times in my life where there has been something hard that I didn't want to do, especially maybe when it was for someone else. And I tried to find excuses and I tried to find ways to get out of it. And I'm ashamed to admit, most of the time I'm pretty good at coming up with reasons if I want to avoid doing something. And a lot of times I've gotten out of it. Maybe I can find somebody else to do it for me. Or maybe I can just explain away the need for it to be done. And think about, Jesus had all of those options and more. He had the authority to speak as God. He could have changed the rules. He had the authority to put someone else in his place if that's what he wanted to do. But that wasn't the plan. And he had the authority to just say, no, I'm not going to do it. Father, please send 12 legions of angels to rescue me from this disaster that I'm in. And he didn't do it. You know how many times, if I had it my ability to call 12 legions of angels to get me out of a situation, I would have done it, right? Talk about the ultimate don't go to jail card, right? Get out of the situation. Let God take care of it. But that's not what Jesus did. Just like he had made all of those decisions on his journey to make sure that he got to the cross at the right time, in the right circumstances, when it came time for him to act, he did. And when it came time for him to sacrifice himself, that's exactly what he did. And I've always looked to the time when Jesus was praying under one of these trees as perhaps the most pivotal moment in the story. Was him actually going to the cross important? Absolutely. Was his actual passing and those last words that he made there, giving up his spirit and actually dying, and then the third day being raised for us, is that all important? Yes. But the moment when things were on that razor's edge, The moment when it seems in history that things could have gone one way or the other based on a choice was here in the garden. This is where he decided, I'm going to put aside my personal interests. This is the time when he learned obedience, because he was asking for a way out, but yet still willing to put the needs of others above what he wanted to do. You know, I've been a Christian for, I honestly don't know, 35 something years. As I approach turning 50 this year, I can't believe I said that, but as I approach that, I start to think about how much knowledge I've gained. And in some circles, I'm actually considered a fairly decent Bible scholar. But I'll tell you what, the more I study, the more I know what I don't know. And what I don't know is how somebody who had the power to avoid that terrible death on the cross, somebody who had the authority to talk to his Father and say, please, no more, just get me out of this, but then didn't. I don't understand it. Because I know I would have taken that out. Absolutely, I would have. If I'm being honest with myself, I probably would have, years before, tried to find a way not to be looking toward Jerusalem. But instead, in the garden, Jesus put me over himself. And he put Josh over himself. And Sam. And Lawrence. And Derek. Not just some nameless group of people, but me, Scott, over himself. Let's think about that as we partake of this supper.